The night Vivienne Calloway walked into the Hargrove Foundation Winter Gala, she told herself she wasn't nervous. She lied. The dress was new. A deep burgundy wrap that her best friend Danny had spent 45 minutes convincing her to buy. "It's you, Viv. It's absolutely you." Viv had stood in the dressing room mirror for a long time after Danny said that, trying to see what Danny saw. Mostly she saw the places where the fabric pulled, the softness of her arms, the way her hips filled the silhouette in a way that no fashion magazine had ever told her was something to be proud of. She bought the dress anyway. That had felt like a small victory at the time. Now, standing at the entrance of the Hargrove Grand Ballroom in downtown Chicago, surrounded by women who looked like they'd been assembled rather than born, thin and polished and arranged perfectly inside their gowns, that small victory was starting to feel very far away. The gala was the kind of event that reminded you, in very precise and deliberate ways, exactly where you stood in the world. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the marble floor. Champagne arrived without being asked for. The flower arrangements cost more than Vivienne's monthly rent. She knew this because she had personally sourced them 3 weeks ago, when she was still director of events at the Hargrove Foundation, before Nathan Pruitt decided that her position was redundant, and her contract was a liability, and her 5 years of building their entire relations program from a spreadsheet and a prayer was apparently worth one sterile HR meeting and a severance check she hadn't cashed yet out of spite. She was here tonight because she'd been invited before any of that happened, and she was not going to give Nathan Pruitt the satisfaction of an empty chair with her name on it. So she straightened her spine, lifted her chin the way her mother had always told her to, and walked into the room she had spent 3 months planning. It looked exactly the way she'd imagined it. That almost broke her. She found the bar and ordered sparkling water. She wanted her head clear, and positioned herself near the edge of the room where she could watch without being watched. It was a skill she had developed over a lifetime of being the largest woman in most rooms. You learned to find the walls. You learned to take up less space than you actually occupied. You learned to make yourself a background detail in other people's evenings. She was halfway through her water when she heard his voice. "Well, I'll be honest. I didn't expect to see you here." She knew the voice before she turned around. Of course she did. She had spent 2 years learning every register of it, the way it went flat when he was annoyed, sharp when he wanted to wound, smooth and warm when he needed something from her. Nathan Pruitt looked exactly as she remembered him from 3 weeks ago, which was to say he looked expensive and self-satisfied, and like a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he deserved the space he occupied. He was with someone, a woman, blonde, angular, wearing a dress that looked like it had been applied rather than worn. She was looking at Vivienne with the particular expression of someone who had been told a story and was now meeting the subject of it. "Nathan," Vivienne said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "You actually came." He said it like she'd done something slightly embarrassing. "I have to say I respect the audacity." He looked her over, not subtly, not with any pretense of politeness, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Though I have to wonder if that dress was the right call. There's a lot of fabric happening there." The woman on his arm let out a small, involuntary laugh, and then covered it with her champagne glass. Vivienne felt it the way you feel cold water when you're already cold. Not shock. Something quieter and more familiar than shock. The old specific shame of being looked at and found lacking by someone who had once held her face in his hands and called her extraordinary. She did not look away. She would not give him that. "I organized this event," she said. "Every centerpiece, every lighting cue, every donor seating arrangement, which means that arrangement over there," she gestured toward the table near the window, "is where you're sitting tonight, next to Gerald Whitmore from the Whitmore Trust." She let a beat pass. "Gerald doesn't drink. He also doesn't like to be approached about funding before dinner. Just thought you should know." Nathan's smile flickered. Vivienne set her water glass down on the nearest surface and turned to walk away. She made it exactly 6 steps before her heel caught the edge of a seam in the marble floor, old marble, uneven. She'd flagged it in the venue report, and she stumbled. Not badly. She caught herself on a nearby high-top table. No one fell. Nothing spilled. But she felt the heat rush to her face, and she heard Nathan make a sound behind her, that short, barely suppressed sound that men like him made when the universe offered them a gift. "Careful," he said. "Lot of momentum there." She was going to leave. That was the decision she made in the 3 seconds that followed. She was going to leave, go home, pour herself a very large glass of wine, and call Danny and describe this night in excruciating detail until they were both laughing at it. That was unkind. The voice came from somewhere to her left, low, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had learned a long time ago that rooms went quiet for it. Vivienne turned. The man standing approximately 4 feet away was not someone she recognized, which was notable, because she had built the guest list for this event herself. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the 2 extra inches men added in their heads, and dressed in a dark suit that had clearly been made specifically for him, because nothing off a rack would have managed that. Dark hair, slightly longer than convention would dictate. A face that was... She searched for the word and landed on considered. Like someone had thought very carefully about each feature before committing. He was looking at Nathan Pruitt with an expression of mild interest, the way a scientist might look at a specimen that had done something only marginally surprising. "I beg your pardon," Nathan said. "What you just said," the man replied. "It was unkind." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Nathan straightened. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "We haven't." The man didn't offer his name. He looked at Vivienne instead. "Are you all right?" The question was direct, not performative. "He was actually asking on mine," she said. Then, because that felt like a lie, "My heel caught on Nevin marble near the north entrance," he said. "I noticed it when I came in. Someone should have flagged it." "I did," she said, "in November. It was in the venue report." Something moved across his expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. Then someone should have read the venue report. He had still not looked back at Nathan. Nathan was starting to understand that this was intentional. "I'm sorry," Nathan said, and his voice had acquired the particular edge it got when he was recalibrating, when he'd decided someone was important enough to perform differently for. "Hargrove Foundation, are you a donor?" "I don't think we've—" "Sutton," the man said. "Elias Sutton." The name landed in Nathan's expression like a stone in still water. Vivienne watched the ripples. She didn't know the name, had never known it, had spent 5 years at the foundation and clearly had gaps. But she understood, from the way Nathan's whole architecture shifted, that she was supposed to. "Mr. Sutton." Nathan's voice had changed entirely. "Of course, I had no idea you were attending this year. We would have, the foundation would have arranged." "I prefer to move without arrangements," Elias Sutton said. He finally looked at Nathan then, and it was not a warm look. "You were with the foundation in what capacity?" I'm the new director of strategic development. I took over the events portfolio recently, among other..." "Took over from whom?" A pause. "From Miss Calloway." Elias Sutton looked at Vivienne. "Calloway," he said, as if placing the name somewhere. "Vivienne Calloway," she said. "Former director of events." "Former," he repeated. He said it the way you said a word that didn't quite fit. Then he looked back at Nathan with an expression that, for all its calm, made Nathan take a very small and probably unconscious step backward. Whoever organized this evening did exceptional work. The donor seating alone reflects a sophisticated understanding of relationship dynamics I rarely see at these events. He paused. "Was that you?" Nathan opened his mouth. "It was Ms. Calloway's work," Elias said, before Nathan could speak. "The venue report you didn't read makes that clear." Vivienne stared at him. Nathan made a sound that was not quite a word. "I'd like to speak with Miss Calloway," Elias said. "If you'll excuse us." It was not a request. The grammar was polite, but the physics of it were not. Nathan simply found himself no longer part of the conversation, the way objects fell away from a current without any particular drama. Elias Sutton looked at Vivienne. "Would you walk with me? There's a terrace off the east wing that's considerably quieter." She almost said no. The rational part of her brain, the part that had spent 31 years being careful about men who appeared from nowhere, with easy authority and perfect suits, was composing a very sensible refusal. "Yes," she said instead. The terrace was quiet, as promised. December cold, sharper than she expected, the city spread below them in its millions of lights. She crossed her arms against the chill, and he took off his jacket without comment and held it out to her. "You don't have to. I'm warm-blooded," he said. "Take it." She took it. It was heavy and faintly cedar-scented and embarrassingly comfortable. She told herself this was just warmth. "You knew who I was," she said. "Before you came over, you'd read the venue report." "I read everything before I attend something," he said. "Professional habit. What do you do?" "Currently, I'm deciding whether to endow a chair at the Hargrove Foundation's research division." He looked out at the skyline. "It's a significant investment. I like to understand the operational competency of the organizations I fund before I commit." She was quiet for a moment. And I've been watching the Foundation's event operations for 3 cycles. The last 2 galas were serviceable, competent but uninspired. He turned to look at her. "This one is different. The donor flow is logical without being regimented. The seating reflects actual relationship histories, not just giving levels. The flowers are from the same grower the Foundation's largest donor uses for his daughter's charity, a detail that cost nothing to include and will be noticed." He paused. "These are not accidents." "They're not," she agreed. "You built this. I built this." She looked at the lights below. "And then I got laid off 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "Why?" he asked. Nathan Pruitt needed to justify his new title. Restructuring is easier to explain than admitting you hired someone redundant to a role that was already being done well. "He told you this. He didn't have to." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Then, what are you doing now?" "I have some savings." "I've been thinking." "About what?" She wasn't sure why she told him. Maybe it was the cold, or the distance from the party, or the fact that this man had walked up to someone being unkind to her without being asked, without any visible agenda, and simply said that was unkind, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I want to build something myself," she said. "I've spent 5 years making other people's visions look good. I know every vendor in this city, every venue quirk, every donor relationship dynamic the Hargrove Foundation depends on. I know what makes events work. I want to do it without someone like Nathan Pruitt putting his name on it." Elias looked at her for a moment. Not the way Nathan had looked at her, not an assessment of surfaces, not a catalogue of what she lacked, something more attentive than that. Like he was actually listening, actually filing things away, because he thought they mattered. "The dress?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "When Pruitt made his comment, you didn't flinch." He said it as a simple observation. "Most people would have. I've been not flinching for a long time," she said. "It takes practice." "I imagine it does." He looked out at the skyline again. "For what it's worth, and I recognize you didn't ask, the dress is excellent. The color against the light in that ballroom is striking. You looked like someone who belonged at the center of the room." She should have deflected. She should have made a small, self-deprecating joke the way she usually did when people said things like this, the way she'd learned to take the pressure off the moment, to make everyone comfortable. She didn't. "Thank you," she said. Just that, like she meant it, like she was going to let herself mean it. They stayed on the terrace for 40 minutes. She lost track of the cold. He asked about the vendor relationships she'd built, and she found herself talking, actually talking, the way she almost never did at events like this, about the florist in Wicker Park who gave her the family discount because she'd sent 6 brides his way, about the catering manager at this very hotel who owed her a favor she'd never called in, about the private dining room on the 42nd floor of the Meridian building that nobody knew about, because the building's PR had buried the listing, and how she'd found it by accident and used it twice for small donor cultivation dinners that had yielded a combined total of $4 million for the foundation. Elias listened. That was the thing about him. He actually listened, not waiting for his turn, not constructing his next sentence while she was still finishing hers. "You have an unusual mind for this," he said. "For event planning, for understanding how people work," he said. "Events are just the mechanism. What you're describing is relationship architecture." She had never heard anyone put it that way. It was exactly right. "My company holds its annual leadership summit in March," he said. "We've used the same event firm for 6 years. The results have been adequate. Adequate has started to feel like a waste of money." He turned to look at her. "I'd be interested in discussing an alternative." She was careful. She had learned to be careful. "I don't have a company yet," she said. "I have an idea and a contact list." "You have this building's catering manager in your pocket, and a florist in Wicker Park who gives you family rates," he said. "That's not nothing. An event at your scale would require a conversation," he said. "I'm suggesting a conversation, not a contract." She looked at him. He looked back. In the ballroom behind them, the dinner announcement chimed. "I'll need to return your jacket," she said. "Keep it for now." He reached into the breast pocket and produced a card, clean and simple, just a name and a number, and held it out. "Call my assistant on Monday. I'll make sure she's expecting you." She took the card. It was warm from his pocket. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He considered the question, not evasively, genuinely, like it deserved a real answer. "Because you built something good and someone put his name on it and then got rid of you," he said. "And because a woman who flags an uneven marble seam in a venue report and actually understands Gerald Whitmore's pre-dinner policy is someone I'd rather have working toward my interests than at the mercy of someone else's restructuring." A pause. "And," he said, quieter, "because what he said was unkind, and you deserved better than to just walk away from that without anything being said." Inside, Nathan Pruitt was working the room with the particular energy of a man who needed something. Vivienne saw him from across the ballroom when she came back in, saw the way he tracked across the space, saw the moment he spotted Elias Sutton near the bar and changed course. She watched Elias say 4 words to him. She couldn't hear them from where she stood, but she watched Nathan go very still, the way tall buildings went still in the moment before the wind shifted. She watched him nod once, the way you nodded when refusing was not available to you. She watched him drift away from that conversation looking like a man who had just understood something about the evening that he hadn't understood before. She didn't feel triumphant about it. That surprised her. She just felt clear, the way air felt after rain. Danny called at 11:15 when Vivienne was in a cab heading home, Elias's jacket still around her shoulders because she'd forgotten. Or not forgotten. Exactly. "Tell me everything," Danny said. "No, wait. Tell me the bad parts first, because your voice sounds weird." Nathan made a comment about my dress. "Of course he did. That man is a wound that walks around." A pause. "And then?" Vivienne looked out the cab window at the city moving past. "And then something else happened," she said. "Something good." She turned the card over in her hand, Elias Sutton, the number in clean dark ink. "I think so," she said. "Something that might be very good." She called on Monday. His assistant, a woman named Patricia, who had the efficient warmth of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and enjoyed it, told her that Mr. Sutton had briefed her and that he'd asked her to block 2 hours on Thursday afternoon. 2 hours, Vivienne thought. She spent the 3 days between thinking about what she would say. She made lists. She drafted a preliminary concept, not a full proposal, just a framework, something to show she'd taken the conversation seriously. She called the Wicker Park florist. She called the catering manager at the Hargrove Hotel, called in that favor finally, learned what it was actually worth when someone was in your corner. She started to understand what she had. Thursday arrived. She wore a slate blue dress she'd owned for 2 years and never had occasion for. It fit her the way good clothes were supposed to fit, honoring the shape of the body wearing them rather than working against it. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time before she left. She didn't apologize for what she saw. That felt like the beginning of something. The offices of Sutton Capital were on the 38th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue that you could see from almost anywhere in the city on a clear day. The lobby was the kind of quiet that cost money. Patricia met her at the elevator bank and walked her to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made the city look like it had been arranged for her specifically. Elias was already there. He was in a different suit, charcoal this time, no tie, and he stood when she came in. Not the performative half-rise that men did at certain dinners. He stood completely, like she was worth the whole gesture. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Vivienne," she said. "Please." He nodded once. Vivienne. She set her materials on the table, the framework document, the preliminary vendor sheet, a one-page summary of what she was thinking. And for the next 2 hours, they worked. Actually worked. He asked questions that told her he'd thought about the event before she arrived. She asked questions that made him rethink 2 things he'd assumed were settled. At one point, she was at the whiteboard sketching a room flow, and she turned around and caught him watching her with that same expression from the terrace. Attentive, quiet, like someone who had found something worth paying close attention to. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she pointed at the board and said, "The reason the cocktail flow breaks down at your current venue is the service corridor placement. It creates a bottleneck that nobody notices until the 3rd drink cycle when your senior leadership is stuck in a traffic jam next to the shrimp." He made a sound that was unmistakably a real laugh, short and genuine. "That," he said, "is a sentence I have never heard in 6 years of inadequate summits." She started the company in February. It was small, just her and a part-time coordinator she'd worked with at the foundation, a woman named Reese, who was organized in the specific way that made chaos manageable. The name on the LLC paperwork was Calloway Collective, which Danny said was both professional and fierce, which Vivienne decided was exactly right. The Sutton Capital Summit was the first event on the books. It was also the largest event she had ever personally managed. And there were several nights in the 5 weeks leading up to it when she stood in her kitchen at midnight eating crackers and wondering at what scale her life choices had diverged from sanity. But the vendors showed up. The florist in Wicker Park brought 3 assistants and a van that smelled like winter roses. The catering manager gave her a team that ran like precision machinery. The venue, not the one Sutton Capital had been using, a different one she'd found, a restored warehouse on the north side with sightlines and acoustics that made the space feel like an event wanted to happen inside it, cooperated in every particular. The morning of the event, Elias arrived early. She was doing a final walkthrough, and he appeared at the main entrance in a dark coat, looking at the space with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectations upward. "This is not what I pictured," he said. "Is that good?" she asked. "It's considerably better than what I pictured." She showed him the room flow, the service logistics, the breakout configuration for the afternoon sessions. He walked beside her and asked good questions, and at one point his hand came to the small of her back, briefly, when they were navigating a narrow corridor between equipment cases, a gesture so natural and unconscious that she didn't register it until they were back in the main space, and it was already gone. She noticed she wanted to go back. The summit ran for 14 hours. Everything that could go wrong in advance had gone wrong in advance, which meant, by a principle Vivienne had developed over 5 years, that the day itself went smoothly. The dinners she'd prefixed, the AV she'd had redundantly loaded, the florist's assistants who'd rearranged the centerpieces twice, while no one was looking to account for the afternoon light shift. By 9 that evening, the last session had wrapped, the catering team was breaking down the buffet, and the guests were in the kind of warm, satisfied conversations that meant the evening had done what an evening was supposed to do. Vivienne was in the corridor outside the main hall reviewing the vendor settlement sheet when Elias found her. "Your team," he said, "is exceptional." "They are," she agreed. "The Meridian Group's CEO asked me who did this. He named a company she recognized, one of the country's larger private equity firms, the kind of name that opened doors by proximity. I gave her your card." Vivienne looked up. "You carry my card," she said. "I had Patricia order them when you sent over the contract paperwork," he said. "I've given out 11 in the last 8 months. I should probably have asked your permission." She stared at him. 11? "You've been building a reputation whether you knew it or not," he said. "People talk, particularly after Gerald Whitmore mentioned to 3 different people that this was the first Hargrove Gala in 4 years where the seating arrangement actually reflected who he was willing to sit next to." The Gerald Whitmore detail landed in her chest in a complicated way. The work she'd done quietly, the years of attention she'd paid, the relationship notes she'd kept in a spreadsheet that nobody but her had thought to look at. "That was my work," she said. "Not Nathan's, mine." "I know," Elias said simply. "So does Gerald." She looked at the settlement sheet in her hands. Then she looked at him. The corridor was quiet. The sounds of the breakdown crew filtered from the main hall, muffled, domestic, warm. "I'm not sure," she said. "What's happening here?" "Between us," he said. "Between us." He was quiet for a moment, the honest kind of quiet. "I think," he said carefully, "that I went to a charity gala expecting to evaluate an institution and instead found a person, and I think that person is more than I was expecting to find." He paused. "And I'm not someone who says more than he means." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him, not because she was naive, not because she wanted to, but because she had spent 5 years learning to read rooms and the people in them, and this particular room said true. "I'm not easy," she said, "not a warning. A fact. I have opinions about venue contracts. I will always read the fine print. I argued with your AV coordinator for 40 minutes last week about cable management." "I know," he said. "Patricia told me. She also told me your note about the cable management turned out to be correct." "It always does," she said. Something in his expression, that quiet adjacent to a smile thing she was beginning to understand was its own language, shifted into something warmer. "Vivienne," he said. Her name in his mouth was different than it was in anyone else's, like he'd thought about how it sounded and decided he approved. "Can I take you to dinner?" Not a meeting. Not a debrief. Dinner." She thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, standing at the edge of a ballroom she'd built, crossing her arms against a room that felt like it was built for everyone but her. She thought about what it had taken to buy the burgundy dress. She thought about standing at a whiteboard and making a man who ran a company laugh, really laugh, by saying the word shrimp. "Yes," she said, like she meant it, like she was going to let herself mean every good thing that was coming. 6 months later, when a journalist writing a profile on the sudden emergence of Calloway Collective asked Vivienne what had been the turning point, the moment things shifted, she didn't tell the whole story. Some of it was not for publication, but she said this. There was a night, she told the journalist, when she almost let someone make her feel like she didn't belong somewhere she had built. And then something happened to remind her that the room had always been hers. She'd just forgotten to stand in the middle of it. She didn't mention Nathan Pruitt by name. She didn't need to. The last anyone heard, he had been restructured out of his own position 8 months after Vivienne's departure, replaced by someone younger and cheaper and, ironically, less qualified. He had reached out to her once, through LinkedIn, some long, careful message about how things happened the way they happened, and he hoped there were no hard feelings. And he'd seen the coverage about the Calloway Collective, and it looked like she'd landed on her feet. She had read it twice. She had not replied. She had closed the app and gone back to the venue walkthrough she was doing for a gala of her own this time, a benefit for a women's re-entry foundation, an organization she had started supporting, partly because of a conversation with a man on a cold terrace who had said you deserved better than to just walk away from that without anything being said. She walked the room. She checked the marble near the north entrance. Even. Good. She reviewed the seating arrangement against her relationship notes. She stood in the center of the ballroom and looked at what she had made. She did not cross her arms. She stood in the middle of the room and let herself take up all the space that had always been hers.